Today, we'll be talking about the Great Depression and its effects. The Depression and its effects gradually escalated in a series of 10 weeks. During these 10 weeks, stocks on the New York Stock Exchange had fallen by 50%. This affected everyone in the US. Men, women, and children of all races and ages were hurt in this time of crisis. When the Depression happened, relying on others was an uncommon thing for Americans. Pride controlled what they did. Asking for help was the last resort to people in the Depression. In this video, we'll be analyzing how exactly people were affected. With scarce food and jobs, there was only so much women and children could do during the Depression. Eleanor Roosevelt, President Roosevelt's wife, sought out and traveled to see how exactly these people were affected. Seeing these poor rural areas, she went back to President Roosevelt and created the New Deal programs to assist in the Depression. Hearing about this, children often wrote to Mrs. Roosevelt hoping to receive her aid. The children mostly sought out food, clothing, and utilities such as a stove, a highly requested item outside of food and clothing. Most of these letters wanted to be kept a secret outside of their parents, one reason being getting a beating from their parents. Pride held a lot of people back from receiving help, hence the reason for beatings if children's letters were made public, as pride was controlling how people acted during the Depression. Women were no exception to this. Women had no work, usually sitting, unable to do anything, and going hungry as they wouldn't even wait in bread lines. Jobs were just as difficult, or even harder, for women to obtain as they were for men. While they did sit without a job, they often felt shame, as one woman during this time wrote. We look at the floor dreading to see that knowledge in each other's eyes. There's a kind of humiliation towards it. As we talk about the Depression and how it affects the common man, we have my co-host, Anthony Lagunes, to talk about how men and minorities were affected by the Depression.
Thank you for having me, JP. Life during the Depression was hard on everybody, but it was especially tough on men. In 1929, the market crashed. The main reason it crashed was because of the influx of bank loans and overinflated shares of stocks. After hearing this news, everyone panicked, rushing over to pull their stocks out before the market crashed even further. Little did they know that it would only cause it to drop harder and faster. The following years were no better. Most men and women were out of jobs and struggling to pay for necessities like food and heat. Few were lucky enough to pick up shifts, which had severely undercut pay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Others sold all their possessions to make some quick cash. If parents couldn't afford to keep their children fed or warm, they would send their kids off to live with some relatives who could afford to keep them. Some men felt the need to leave their families due to them not being able to provide for them. The Depression took a huge toll on men's mental health. Many had nowhere else to go except to beg their friends or even random people for money and goods. Men felt humiliated to have to ask for help from others and often didn't even ask, in order to retain some of their pride they have left. The men who were fortunate enough to have some money quickly spent it all on overdue payments for heat and electricity. Some even had to pay banks back for loans, which yielded high amounts of interest. Men would wait in bread lines for hours, hoping to pick up some free food for their families. Some folks would even ride the rails from one town to another, hopefully picking up a job. Most of the jobs that were still providing work were labor-intensive, like farming and military jobs, but openings were scarce due to the influx of Mexican-American immigrants. Immigration during the Depression was at an all-time high, which angered quote-unquote true Americans. To combat immigration, state governments, with the backing of the federal government, carried out mass deportation raids. These raids were given the title Mexican Repatriation, which deported up to 2 million Mexican Americans, 60% of which being born in America. These raids tore apart whole families and communities. Children were often displaced from their families, causing generational trauma for Mexican American children. Through this mass deportation, the state officials hoped that resources and jobs would be more available with the immigrants gone.
Nope.
They were so sure of this that President Hoover's Secretary of Labor, William Delwick, passed local laws that prevented Mexican Americans from holding jobs. There were even laws that prevented Mexican Americans from having government jobs, regardless of their citizenship status. This effect proved to be futile, as the economy only worsened. The Mexican repatriation raids were estimated to cause more damage, because Americans did not want to fill the holes left in labor-intensive jobs that the Mexican Americans usually held.
Well, thank you, Anthony, for telling us about the hardships men and minorities went through during the Great Depression. This was a very tragic time. I hope that this video shows just how bad and what specific effects were on people like you and me.
Nope.
Special thanks to Anthony Lagunes for helping me script and write this video. Thank you for me, who edited and videoed this video. Thank you very much for watching. Goodbye!